Welcome to Crosspointe.
Welcome to Crosspointe.
Welcome to Crosspointe.
We are an inclusive faith community
seeking to live out the loving, just, and generous way of Jesus.
We are participants in a long tradition
that's less concerned with doctrines and dogma that demand total agreement,
but a life to be lived, enjoyed, and given away to others.
What unites us is a growing awareness that life is precious.
That we are made by love in order to love.
This community is comprised of and affirms the entire human family.
Regardless of race, age, creed,
physical abilities, marital or economic status,
gender identity, or sexual orientation.
So, if you're curious and have come to see,
if you are tired and have come to rest,
if you are grateful and have come to share,
if you are wounded and have come to heal,
if you're joyful and have come to celebrate,
if you are uprooted and have come to belong,
welcome home.
Welcome home.
Welcome home.
Welcome home.
Hi, I want to start our time together today with something called a responsive reading. Now, you may have heard of this if you've come from a liturgical church tradition, or maybe not. But what a responsive reading is the leader will read a portion of the text by themselves, and then the group responds or reads the next portion together. So if you're at home, then you can, if you'd like, respond by reading aloud the bold portion that you're going to see. Or you can just sit and read and listen to me read the whole thing. This is from Psalm 95 and Psalm 118. O come, let us sing to the Lord. Let us make a joyful noise to the rock of our salvation. We come today with thanksgiving. Let us make a joyful noise with songs of praise, for the Lord is a great God and a great ruler above all gods. We come today with joy. In God's hands are the depths of the earth. The heights of the mountains are God's also. The sea and the dry land are God's. O come, let us worship and bow down. Let us kneel before the Lord, our Maker. We come today with gratitude. We give thanks to God because she is good. God's love, steadfast love, endures forever. God's steadfast love endures forever. We come today with thanksgiving. Amen.
Lord, make me an instrument of peace, an instrument of peace. Lord, make me an instrument of peace, an instrument of peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is darkness, let me sow light. For in the giving we shall receive, and in the dying we're given life. Lord, make me an instrument of peace, an instrument of peace. Lord, make me an instrument of peace, an instrument of peace. Where there is sorrow, let me sow hope. Where there is doubt, let me sow faith. Where there is injury, your pardon gift, your consolation to those in pain. Lord, make me an instrument of peace, an instrument of peace. Lord, make me an an instrument of peace. Amen. 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 I need a reform. I need a new mind. I need to set my prejudice aside. I need a new soul. I need a heartbreak. I need to see the tragedies abate. We are bound to one another. We can be human only together. Only together. I need a reform. I need a new mind. I need to set my prejudice aside. I need a new soul. I need a heartbreak. I need to see the tragedies abate. We are bound to one another. We can be human only together. Only together. We are bound to one another. We can be human only together. Only together. I need a reform. I need a reform. Let justice flow like a river, like a river. Righteousness like a stream, like a stream. Let justice flow like a river, like a river. Righteousness like a stream, like a stream. Let justice flow like a river, like a river. Righteousness like a stream, like a stream. We are bound to one another. We can be human only together. Only together. We are bound to one another. We can be human only together. Only together. I need a reform. I need a reform.
Hey there, Crosspointe. My name's Corinne DeVore. I'm the project manager of student ministry here, and I get to work with Jennifer Tuttle, our incredible student pastor. Together, we plan all the events for and then get to hang out with the middle school and high school students. Okay, here's some announcements for you. Next Sunday, July 2nd, there will be no in-person service. We will be meeting online here like we always do, but because of the holiday weekend, we will not have in-person service. So hopefully you'll tune in, watch the service online, and then go have a wonderful day with your loved ones. The following Sunday, July 9th, we will be back in person, and that's also move-up day for students. So what that means is any rising kindergartner through 12th grader will transition to their new grade level that day. And how that's going to look is rising kindergartner through 3rd grade will be on the clubhouse hallway. There's a specific room for each grade to be dropped off and picked up from. And we'll have signs on the doors and people in the hallway to help make it really easy to figure out. Any rising 4th and 5th graders will be in the warehouse, which is located up at the top of the stairs right by the auditorium. And then any rising middle schoolers will be in the den, which is also upstairs, but across the bridge. Finally, any rising high schoolers we welcome to serve with us on Sunday mornings. The last bit about Move Up that I want to share is that any of the transitional grades, which would be rising kindergartner, rising 6th grade, rising 9th grade, will be hosting some special gatherings to help you get comfortable with the environment, meet some new friends, ask any questions you have. And as someone with children in the preschool hallway and the elementary hallway, and I work with middle school and high school students, I have learned that these opportunities are a great way to get to know any of the leaders in those areas and to make new friends. So I really encourage you to check out any of these special gatherings, all of which you can find the information for online at crosspoint.org/moveup. Now, next, I want to share some really exciting news. Spencer LaJoy is an incredibly talented singer and songwriter, and they are going to be coming to Crosspointe to do an outdoor sunset performance for all of us in our courtyard. Their music is incredible, and we really value supporting them as a non-binary artist and person whose honesty and experience have been incredibly impactful and meaningful to people all around the world. So at this particular concert, we're going to continue to show our support in a variety of ways, one of which is we are bringing in some professionals who will film the concert and turn it into a live music video so that Spencer can use this to expand the way in which their heart and their message goes out all around the world to even more people and inspires even more individuals. So we hope that you will come and join us, and by being in the audience, you'll be able to participate in the filming of this video. The next announcement is about our involvement with Habitat for Humanity. As you might know, over the past few months, we've been building a home for a family in need in the old pool place portion of Southeast Raleigh. You all have done incredible work. The house is looking phenomenal, but it is not done yet. There's still some vinyl siding, some interior doors, some other stuff that needs to get done. And so if you would like to help get us over the finish line and get this house done, please go to Habitat Wake's website and sign up to volunteer. Finally, if you would like to participate in helping fund all of the good that we do on a daily basis here at Crosspointe, we'd like to invite you to contribute financially. There's a variety of ways you can do it. You can donate online, you can send in a check, you can do PayPal, stock, all sorts of options. And to do that, you can go to www.crosspointe.org/contribute or text crosspointenc to 77977. Thank you so much for being a part of our community. I hope your day is filled with love, and I look forward to seeing you at any of our summer events.
I have spent a lot of time studying Esther and writing about Esther and asking questions about Esther, like how old exactly was she? And probably really young. And what do we mean by saying she was beautiful? And I learned her story essentially like as a beauty pageant. She won this beauty pageant, and she was so beautiful that this Jewish woman wins the beauty pageant as a queen for a Persian king. And so I've tried to learn, and there's not a lot out there about what does that mean? What could she have looked like? What kind of beauty gets you picked out to essentially be part of the king's harem. And that's the part of the story that I think when I really started to study, it was very disturbing. Like, wait a second, she wasn't queen like Queen Elizabeth. She wasn't destined to be queen like we talk about Britain and the royal family there. That's not what we're talking about. And then to realize that Esther was also Hadassah, and that my Jewish friends, they know of Esther as Hadassah. That's her name. And when I really sat in that space, I thought, oh, she passed. She was a woman of color who by name and culture and beauty passed into Persian culture for survival, because there weren't a lot of choices, because her elder thought that was the best thing for her. And so instead of Hadassah, she was Esther. And I think, oh, that's why I'm Kathy, and that's not why I'm Kyunga, which is my given Korean name from my grandfather. And that idea of having a dual identity and hiding a part of yourself, which is what Esther did in the palace. And I think, yeah, that's a lot of what I did growing up, is to try and not be Korean, to be embarrassed about my name, to be embarrassed about the smell of my home and the food that I ate, and to be embarrassed about my parents and the way they looked and the way they sounded. And I realized that when Esther hears about her uncle wearing sackcloth and ashes, and she sends him clothes, I think, oh my God, that's what I did. I was embarrassed about my ethnicity and my culture, and that's why probably until college, I never corrected anyone who mispronounced my last name. Like, just let it go, it's not a big deal. And so on so many fronts, I wrestle with and love Esther's story, because it's one of a woman finding her voice through a lot of missteps and survival. Amen.
Hi. What you might have gathered from the video is that I really want to dig into the story of Esther today, mostly. And I wish I could say that I came up with this message because of some sort of divine inspiration or because it was a part of the liturgy already, but I can't say that. I wanted to talk about this passage today because a few weeks ago I got really annoyed. If I'm honest, I got really angry. That doesn't happen very often for me. But a few weeks ago, I was in proximity to a group of women in which to just look at us might have seemed that we had a lot in common. We were all about the same age, all moms, all living in North Carolina. We were at the same meeting. There was probably other similarities as well. But pretty much that's where the outward commonalities ended. This group of women has since been officially labeled as a hate group. Their views about what's good for children and my views about what is good for children are very much opposed. But although that bothered me, that isn't what made me angry. What irked me to no end was that these other moms were wearing t-shirts with Bible verses on them, from a Bible that I also read. That kind of made my job out of reading and interpreting. But it was clear that we were not interpreting the verses the same way. It was also very clear that by placing the verses on their t-shirts, they felt that their hateful rhetoric and actions were somehow divinely justified. I wanted to tap one of them on the shoulders and say, hey, I'm a pastor. I have degrees. That's out of context. But I didn't. The verse on the shirt was from the Hebrew Bible, from the book of, as you might have guessed, Esther, and you might have heard it. It's pretty famous. It simply said, for such a time as this. And as I sat behind them, that phrase, shouting from their t-shirts, kind of made my blood boil a little bit. It was so out of context. In fact, it was so anti what the story was about. It was almost comical. And that is really what made me want to dig into this story again, and made me want to parse out the ancient languages, to look at the historical context, to look at the varying interpretations, to find aha moments that you so often get when you look into varying perspectives. But I have to be honest that for the most part, that's not what I found. What I was left with was more questions, not concerning the t-shirts. They were definitely out of context. But I was left with a lot more questions. The more I thought about those questions and the more that came up, the more I became okay with that. Because so much of life, including faith, it's about the wrestling with and about how we live when things aren't so black and white, because so few things are. What those moms had done by placing that verse on their t-shirts was to try to make their views the end of the story. And I was in danger of trying to do the same. And often what we think we want when we come to church or to the Bible, particularly if we're white Western Protestants, is to walk away with a nicely packaged message with lots of tweetable lines or memes that we can pull out in a pinch. Sort of Bible answer book. That's not really our reality, is it? And while there are certain things that remain true, the unconditional love of God and the command for us to have the same, as an example of one, what is more true, at least for me right now, is the wrestling. And that is what we're going to do today. We're going to wrestle with an ancient text that still has implications. And as we talk through what at first glimpse seems like a children's story or a good romance, I want you to keep a few things in the front of your mind. First, what questions does this story bring up for you? Not answers, what questions? And second, what does it mean for you, for me, for a person who claims some sort of faith, to be living in the time and place that we are living in now? Where are we in this story? So, Esther. Most scholars have been in agreement for a while that the book of Esther is historical fiction, meaning that there are historical characters and places mentioned, namely the king and the city, but the events don't add up in the historical timeline when we gather all the other data outside of scripture that we have. Now, that does not mean that the story does not have things to teach us. Quite the contrary. For someone who grew up believing that every word of the Bible was absolutely factual and historically accurate, that was difficult to come to, that somehow this fictional document became a sacred text. Because that certainly isn't what the ancient readers believed, that fiction had nothing to teach them or wasn't sacred. A book doesn't need to be factual to hold important truths. Some of the most important truths in my life were learned from fictions, from books like The Kite Runner to Sesame Street, from Jodi Picoult to Steinbeck to Mother Goose. Jesus taught using fictional parables. Rabbis teach often through the hypothetical. Fiction gives us depth of character and relatability that nonfiction often does not. And this is what Esther was for both the writers and the readers of the story. Esther was a story written to explain the Jewish annual celebration of Purim. It also offered a tool to discuss the complexity of living in a world that wasn't quite your own. The Jewish people were living in exile during the setting of this story. Esther isn't just good fiction, it's really good writing. It's a story you want to listen to over and over again. In fact, it's a quick, easy read, and I recommend you taking the time to read through it on your own sometime. But Esther has comedy, it has drama, it has a lot of violence. It's kind of a coming out story. And although we don't have time to get into it today, it's a highly sexualized story. It has actually all the justifications for being added to the banned book list, which ironically, book banning is exactly what the moms with the Esther verses on their t-shirts were at the meeting to push, if they only knew what their t-shirts were promoting. If you haven't heard the story, there's a few important things to note. First, the setting. It takes place in the city of Susa, the capital of the Persian Empire at the time. The Jews had been exiled for generations by this point. First, they were conquered by the Babylonians, and then the Babylonians were conquered by the Persians. And then the second important thing to note are the key characters, because there's a lot of great ones. The king, the first being the king, who's central to the story, Athenarius. The story begins with him throwing a 180-day party for all of his guys. No ladies invited except as entertainment. So the king, he was married to a beautiful woman, Queen Vashti, the second important character. As the video said earlier, she was not a queen as we think of them today. This wasn't a Disney co-rulership. A Persian queen was not a ruler. She existed and remained in the palace and had privilege at the behest of the king, especially for his pleasure. So after several especially long days of partying, the king's male attendants, who were tired of attending to the king, they grew exhausted with him, and they suggested, guys, why don't you invite the women to come over and entertain you now? So the king summoned Vashti to come, parade around for the partiers in her crown. For unclear reasons, but widely debated, Vashti refused to go to the king's party and to be gawked at. As you might imagine, the king didn't like to be told no. So he revoked Vashti's queenship, saying that her bad behavior might rub off on all the wives in the kingdom and make them despise their husbands, and he couldn't have women around the country thinking for themselves. Imagine what might happen. Unfortunately, you can only imagine what happened to Vashti, probably not good things. But after she was gone, the king needed a new queen. So the process of queen selection was to send out the king's attendants about the city, collecting young, beautiful virgin girls, bring them to the palace, give them a year of beauty treatments, and then parade them in front of the king so he could choose which one turned him on the most, and that lucky girl would be his queen. Now, I do need to stop here just to be clear that while many, including Hollywood, have turned Esther into a romantic story, that's not at all what it was. These girls were likely not much older than young teenagers, because they typically were married off once they were able to bear children. What was happening here wasn't romance, and it falls much closer to the category of what today we might consider child exploitation. A year of spa treatments in the palace doesn't make up for all that's lost when you're chosen by the king. But central to this story, and chosen to be one of these girls, is Esther. Esther was an exiled Jew living in Persia and was raised by her uncle Mordecai. Esther was apparently beautiful by the standards of the day, and most importantly, she looked Persian enough so that no one questioned her heritage. Her being Jewish didn't even come to their mind. She was chosen to be in the running as queen. She was taken to the palace, but she kept her Jewish identity a secret. No one in the palace knew who she was, who her uncle was. Nobody knew that she was Jewish. And Esther so embraced her assumed Persian identity that she was even most widely remembered by her Persian name, Esther, rather than her Jewish name, Hadassah. Mordecai, Esther's uncle, he was a devout Jewish man. He was loved in his community. He was a bit of a leader. And while Esther was in her 12 months of beauty treatments, Mordecai would come every day to the palace gates and check how she was doing. And during one of these visits, he overheard a plot to kill the king. And he informed Esther, who informed the proper authorities, and they caught the assassins, which saved the king's life. And the record of Mordecai's good deeds was written down in the king's record book. Well, also, while Mordecai was at the palace gates every day, he ran into a guy named Haman. Now, in this story, in the telling, this is the bad guy. This is the king's right-hand man, but he's the villain. And every time that you hear his name, you need to think, boo, he's not great. He was full of himself. He was drunk on power. Haman and Mordecai met as Haman was leaving the palace and expected, as he always did, for people to bow down when he passed. Mordecai, assumably because of his Jewish law, which we don't know for sure, he refused to bow down. He refused to get homage to Haman. And this infuriated Haman so much that he decided not only was he going to have Mordecai killed for it, he was going to have all of the Jews in Persia wiped out too. So Haman convinced the king to order an edict for the genocide of the Jews, and he began building a gallows for Mordecai. This was what Esther 3 tells us. Then Haman said to the king, "There is a certain people scattered and separated among the people in all the provinces of your kingdom. Their laws are different from those of every other people, and they do not keep the king's laws." So their differences is what he's using as an excuse. So that's not appropriate them. It's not appropriate for the king to tolerate them. The couriers went in haste by order of the king, and the decree was issued in Susa, the capital, and the king and Haman sat down to drink. But the city of Susa was perplexed. When Mordecai learned all that had been done, Mordecai tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and ashes and went through the city wailing with a loud and bitter cry. He wanted everybody to know he was upset. He went to the entrance of the king's gate, for no one might enter the king's gate clothed in sackcloth. In every province, wherever the king's command and his decree came, there was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting and weeping and lamenting, and most of them lay in sackcloth and ashes. But when Esther's maids and her eunuchs came and told her, the queen was deeply distressed. She sent garments to clothe Mordecai, so that he might take off his sackcloths, but he would not accept them. So when Mordecai heard the edict, he responded in a culturally appropriate way for a Jew. He put on mourning clothes. He went through the streets loudly wailing. And when Esther heard about his Jewish behavior and dress, she was not okay with it. It probably bothered her on some level that she knew all her friends were going to die, but he was also making a spectacle of himself. She asked him to stop embarrassing her and put on his Persian clothes. Mordecai, however, responds by sending Esther this message. Do not think that in the king's palace you will escape any more than all the other Jews. For if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will rise from the Jews from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. Who knows? Perhaps you have come to royal dignity for such a time as this. Does that verse sound familiar? Basically, just because Esther is in the palace, don't think she's not going to be killed too. Someone is going to come to their rescue. You're in the right place at the right time, so it should be you, Esther. And Esther was convinced, and she made an elaborate plan. And she told Mordecai this, Go, gather all the Jews to be found in Susa, and hold a fast on my behalf, and neither eat nor drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my maids will also fast as you do, and after that I will go to the king, though it is against the law, and if I perish, I perish. And then Mordecai went away and did everything as Esther had ordered him. Esther's plan was to petition the king, but she had to be strategic about it, because adding to the drama of the story was the fact that no one was allowed to approach the king without his permission. And if you visited the king without being summoned, one of two things would happen. If he extended his scepter to you, you could approach. If he did not, you would die. So, Esther put on the dress she knew the king liked. She sprayed on the perfume that he found most attractive. She put on her royal robes, and she went to the throne room. And the king took one look at her and extended his scepter and told her to ask him for whatever she wanted. So, she invited him to a banquet. He and Haman the next day, and they agreed. Well, that night, the king couldn't sleep. So he did what many of us do when we have insomnia. He pulled out the most boring reading material he could find, and for the king, this was his record books, the same books that told of Mordecai foiling the assassination plot on his life. And in the middle of the night, the king decided he needed to honor the man that saved him. And remember I said this story is also a comedy? The next morning, the king asked Haman, his right-hand guy, what he would suggest if he wanted to honor someone who had done something great for the king. And Haman, thinking the king was really going to honor him, said, For the man whom the king wishes to honor, let royal robes be brought, which the king has worn, and a horse that the king has ridden with the royal crown on his head. Let the robes and the horse be handed over to one of the king's most noble officials. Let him robe the man whom the king wishes to honor, and let him conduct the man on horseback through the open square of the city, proclaiming before him, Thus shall it be done for the man whom the king wishes. Great idea. And the king agreed. He said, Great idea. And Mordecai is the guy I want to honor. Go and get him and honor him by doing everything you just said. And so Haman was forced to dress Mordecai in the king's robes and lead him through the streets on a horse and say nice things about him to everyone as he went. And you can imagine this did nothing to lessen Haman's hatred for Mordecai and the Jews. He was really out for revenge now. Later that evening, Haman and the king went to Esther's banquet. And the king was so pleased that he asked the queen what she wanted. And this is what she said. Queen Esther answered, If I have won your favor, O king, and if it pleases the king, let my life be given to me. That is my petition. And the lives of my people, that is my request. For we have been sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated. If we had been sold merely as slaves, men and women, I would have held my peace, for no enemy can compensate for this damage to the king. Then the king said to Queen Esther, Who is he, And where is he? Who has presumed to do this? And Esther said, a foe and an enemy, this wicked Haman. So the drama is palpable. You can hear the music change. You can visualize Esther pointing her finger at Haman. He is the man. You can picture Haman cowering in the corner as the tables have turned. And ultimately, it's Haman who's executed on the gallows that he was having built for Mordecai. And ultimately, Esther convinces the king to reverse the edict for the genocide of the Jews. And ultimately, Mordecai takes Haman's place as the king's right-hand guy. All of these things have been flipped. The good guys have won. And this is where we like to stop the story. Evil has been averted. Good has been avenged. But there's still 3 chapters left. And within these 3 chapters, the Jews in Persia are permitted one day where they can avenge and defend their lives, with a decree that said, by these letters the king allowed the Jews who were in every city to assemble and defend their lives, to destroy, to kill, to annihilate any armed force of any people or province that might attack them, their women and their children, and to plunder their goods on a single day throughout the provinces, on the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar. So they were allowed for one day to annihilate anyone they thought might have wanted to harm them or kill them. And this is where the annual celebration of Purim came in. It's a celebration of the day that the plot to kill all the Jews failed. It's a celebration of things turned upside down. The weak becomes strong, the unlikely becomes queen, the bad guy is beaten. All in Purim, all rules are off. People are encouraged to put on masks and costumes. For one day, you can be someone else, anyone else, or no one else. On Purim, people are commanded to eat, to drink, and to be merry. In fact, adults are encouraged to drink to the point that they can't tell the difference between Mordecai, the good guy, and Haman, the bad guy. And let's not forget a tidbit, though, that is often preferably left out because it's difficult. Let's not forget that the king had given the Jews permission to kill anyone who had plotted harm against them. And they took him up on it. The story says that Mordecai, the sweet uncle who had sat at the palace gates to check in on his niece, gained so much power that people became afraid. So afraid, in fact, that some people started pretending they were Jewish rather than Persian in order to save their own lives. And in the end, in addition to Haman's 10 sons and all of their families and their children being killed on the gallows that were originally built for Mordecai, we're told that over 75,000 men, women, and children were killed, which sounds to me, to a lot of historians, to go way beyond what would be considered self-defense. And it crosses the line into unbridled revenge and the killing of innocents. After a day of mass killings, the Jewish people took a day off and rested, because you can't break the rules and work and kill on a Sabbath. And then the next day, they got up and celebrated. And this is when my questions really start. It makes me wonder, what happened? How did such an oppressed people turn into such oppressors? Had they forgotten how they had been miraculously saved and just not wanted to extend the same sort of salvation to others? Was it bottled rage from years of exile? Why leave this unsavory detail in the story when it could have easily been written out? I mean, it definitely doesn't make anyone look good. It definitely does not seem to be a reason to celebrate when you continue with the story. And yet here it is. Is it a reminder of what happens when we forget who we are, where we've come from, when we take things too far, when we lose ourselves to revenge? For me, it just mostly raises questions. What kind of person am I if I celebrate my salvation while ignoring the thousands of lives that were just taken? Does the end really justify the means? What are the implications for our modern justifications for war? Another important tidbit to know is that there's another book in the Hebrew Bible, the book of Daniel, that was happening right around the same time as the events in Esther. Both during the Jewish exile, but they are very different stories. Daniel is just slightly before Esther, but overlapping into her life. Some traditions say that Daniel is actually buried in the Persian city of Susa. Some say he was actually killed by Haman before Esther became queen. Daniel and Esther have a lot of similarities. Both grew up living in exile, away from their cultural context that would allow them to practice their religion in the way that was prescribed to them. Both had to adjust to life when things didn't go as planned. Both were unwillingly taken to palaces of foreign kings. But while Esther hid her Jewish heritage, Daniel did not. He proudly flaunted it. And while there's no mention of Esther asking for accommodations for her Jewishness while in the palace, Daniel refused to eat the food so he could follow Jewish dietary law. He also observed the Sabbath. And while the book of Daniel is full of God, talk and stories of God offering repeated miraculous salvation to Daniel, Esther is the only book in the Bible that doesn't mention God at all. Not a hint, not even a name drop, nothing. There is no mention or hint of God anywhere. When Daniel and his friends refused to bow down to the king and were thrown into a furnace of fire, a heavenly being protected them, so not even a hair on their head was singed. They didn't even smell like smoke. And later, when Daniel refused to stop praying to God and was thrown into a den of lions to be their dinner, Yahweh miraculously shut the lions' mouths and Daniel was saved. But when Esther's uncle Mordecai refused to bow down to Haman, God did not show up with a miraculous rescue plan. People there didn't even ask God for help. It was Esther who made a plan to save herself and her family and her people. God's not even recognized. What do we do with this? What does the writer want us to know? How are we to digest it? God miraculously shows up, except when God doesn't. What are qualifications for God's engagement? Does following all the proper religious steps like Daniel make something godly, or is it something else? That would be like saying putting a Bible verse on your t-shirt makes your hateful actions God-sanctioned. But on the flip side, does standing up for a neighbor and fighting for justice, but having no mention of God like Esther, make it any less the work of God? Do we have to say that something is godlike to make it so? What does it mean that Esther hid her Jewish identity? Did that make her a bad Jew? Did that make her outside of doctrine? But did that just make her strategic? What does it mean to be a person who risks your life to save your people and then advocates for the mass killing of your neighbors? What does it mean to be a person who studies scripture and goes to church but then treats everyone around them like dirt? What does it mean to act in the way of God even when there are no miracles? What does it mean in such a time as this, when our realities look more like the ordinary of Esther and less like the miraculous of Daniel's, when we don't see God show up and set things right? What about when our lives look like Daniel's and everybody else's looks like Esther's? Does that say more about us or about God? What does it mean to be a people who live in a way of courage and love, even when we don't know if there will be miracles or not? In the absence of the miraculous, is God still relevant? I warned you I wasn't going to wrap this up nicely. I told you there were going to be questions and that we were going to wrestle. Because after going through Esther, I couldn't with integrity put a period on the end of the sentence. I couldn't wrap it up in a nice bow and give an antidote or moral, because I couldn't find one. Or maybe I just didn't want to find one. And the more honest thing to do is to admit to the wrestling, to admit that there's some really unsettling things in here, and that's okay. And I invite us to do the same. I want to draw us back to what I asked you to hold in your mind from the start. What questions does this raise up in you? What does this mean for you in a time and place and the situations that you're in? I will at least share with you my questions. In addition to all that we just laid out, I always ask, what does this mean for me? What does it mean to be who I am in the time and the place and the situations I am in? What does it mean to be me in my time and place? What does it mean at my job, in my home, with my family, with my difficult teenagers, with my great teenagers, with my husband, with my friends, in the unexpected, in regards to my physical and mental health, in regards to how I interact in my neighborhood, and how I respond when I'm frustrated, when I have no control, or when I hold all of the power, when something is beyond difficult, when things are more gray than black and white, which is most of the time, with or without the miraculous, or with or without blaring signs of God. What does it mean to be me in such a time as this? These are the everyday questions, human questions, communal questions. So what questions are you left with? What tickles the back of your mind and your heart? What can you not quite put a period at the end of? What about the story? What about the ethics? What about the miraculous or the lack of? What about this sacred fiction? What it might be saying to you in your time and place and situation right now? Have a good week.
If you would like to know more or get connected to Crosspointe, go to crosspoint.org. If you're in need of care or assistance, go to crosspoint.org/care. And welcome home.